the decision that never made headlines. Some decisions change history without ever appearing in it. No announcement records them. No headline captures their weight. Yet long after louder moments fade, their consequences continue shaping everything beneath the surface. This story matters today because the most powerful choices are often invisible by design. While attention chases controversy and spectacle, the future is quietly redirected in rooms that never face cameras. And for one sheik, the most important decision he ever made was one the world would never know about. It began with a document that carried no urgency, no deadline, no public pressure, just a proposal folded neatly into routine governance. On the surface, it promised efficiency, alignment, and long-term advantage. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would attract attention. That was precisely what made it dangerous. As he reviewed it, he noticed what others had missed. The decision offered progress, but at the cost of leverage surrendered quietly. Control would shift incrementally. Oversight would soften. Dependencies would form slowly, almost invisibly. Each individual compromise appeared manageable. Together, they reshaped the future. The reveal was unsettling. This was not a decision designed to be debated publicly. It relied on silence to pass smoothly. Once enacted, it would be difficult to reverse, not because it was wrong, but because it would feel inevitable in hindsight. Advisors framed it as harmless, technically sound, politically quiet, the kind of decision leaders welcomed precisely because it avoided friction. No one would object, no one would protest, no one would even notice. But he did. He understood that power rarely vanishes suddenly. It dissolves through convenience, through agreements no one argues against, through choices that feel reasonable until they accumulate into dependency. The question before him was simple, but heavy. Approve it quietly and gain short-term advantage, or stop it and explain a decision no one would ever see the need for. He said nothing at first. No objections, no request for revision. He allowed the proposal to sit unresolved while he traced its long-term consequences, what it would enable, what it would restrict, what future leaders would inherit without knowing where the shift began. That was when the truth became unavoidable. Some decisions are dangerous precisely because they never demand courage. They ask only for silence. And he was approaching the moment where silence itself would become the decision. Whether he spoke or chose not to would determine whether this choice remained invisible or became the quiet line history would never record, but always obey. The proposal lingered longer than expected. In governance, delay itself sends a signal. Questions began surfacing, not loudly, but with curiosity. Why had something so straightforward not moved forward? Advisors offered gentle reminders. Timelines were suggested. Silence, they implied, was inefficient. He remained still, because efficiency was not the risk. Acceptance was. As days passed, he revisited similar moments from the past. Decisions once framed as harmless that later constrained choice. Agreements celebrated for stability that quietly traded flexibility for comfort. Power rarely announces its exit. It negotiates its way out, one reasonable step at a time. The conflict sharpened internally. Some argued that refusing progress invited stagnation. Others warned that hesitation signaled weakness. The proposal, they insisted, aligned with modern standards. Declining it would require justification. Approval required none. That asymmetry mattered. He asked for deeper analysis, not of benefits, but of dependency. What leverage would be lost? What assumptions would harden? What options would disappear quietly over time? The answers were careful, qualified, incomplete. No one denied the trade-offs. They simply minimized them. That was the turning point. When trade-offs are minimized, they're usually being postponed, not avoided. He realized that approving the proposal would not solve a problem. It would defer one. Future leaders would inherit the consequences without having made the choice. They would operate within constraints they never agreed to. Silence today will become inevitability tomorrow. He called a private session with a small circle of trusted advisors, not to debate publicly, to decide responsibly. He made his position clear. the proposal would not proceed. No announcement, no explanation beyond the room, no narrative offered to justify restraint. It would simply be removed from the agenda and replaced with alternatives that preserve flexibility. Some were surprised, others relieved. All understood the weight of the choice. By refusing to approve what no one would question, he had chosen responsibility over convenience. He accepted the quiet cost of inaction, the misadvantage, the unseen criticism, the absence of credit. Because some decisions earn respect only in hindsight, and some must be made knowing that respect may never come at all. The world moved on, unaware, but beneath the surface, the future remained unconstrained, and that was the outcome he had chosen to protect. Time passed, and the decision faded from memory for everyone except those who had been in the room. There were no consequences to explain, no backlash to manage. On the surface, nothing had changed, and yet, beneath that calm, an alternate future had quietly been avoided. The conflict returned years later, disguised as opportunity. A new proposal emerged, different in form, familiar in intent. It promised growth without friction, advantage without attention. This time, however, the underlying constraints were clearer. Dependencies surfaced sooner. Leverage was openly discussed. What had once been invisible was now easier to recognize. That was when the impact of the earlier decision became undeniable, because the system still had a choice. Had the original proposal passed, this new opportunity would not even exist. Paths would already be narrowed. Negotiation would be symbolic. Flexibility would be gone, without anyone remembering when it had disappeared. The turning point settled quietly among those who understood the architecture of power. Restraint had preserved optionality, not in theory, but in practice. The system responded with confidence, not because it was stronger, but because it was freer. Negotiations unfolded on equal footing. Conditions were shaped, not accepted. Advantage was pursued without surrendering control. The difference was subtle, but decisive. No one credited the past decision. There was no record to reference, no document to cite. History offered no footnote explaining why options still existed. The protection he had chosen years earlier remained invisible, even to those benefiting from it. That invisibility was the cost, and the reward. Leadership rarely receives credit for disasters avoided. The absence of crisis leaves no evidence of intervention. Yet this is where its highest responsibility lies. In choices that prevent futures no one will ever know they escaped. Standing alone afterward, he reflected on the paradox. The most important decisions often feel anticlimactic. They lack urgency. They lack resistance. They lack recognition. But they shape everything that comes after. The decision that never made headlines had done exactly that. It had kept the future open. And in doing so, it had proven that sometimes the greatest act of leadership is not what you choose, but what you refuse to quietly give away. The realization arrived without ceremony. No one gathered to acknowledge what had been preserved. No record marked the path not taken. And yet, as new challenges emerged, the system responded with a freedom others quietly lacked. That was the climax, not a victory declared, but an absence felt only by those who understood what had been avoided, while others found themselves constrained by past conveniences, bound by agreements they no longer questioned. This system still moved with choice intact. The difference became visible only in contrast. Negotiations remained balanced. Adjustments remained possible. When conditions shifted, responses adapted without renegotiating identity or authority. The future was not inherited as limitation, but as possibility. The resolution unfolded over time. Younger leaders entered a system that could still decide. They would never know how narrowly that freedom had been protected. They would assume it had always been there, and that, he understood, was success. Because leadership is not measured by memory. It is measured by continuity. Standing back, he accepted the quiet consequence of his choice. There would be no recognition, no acknowledgement of restraint. The decision would never be cited as wisdom. It would never be remembered at all. And that was a final lesson. Some choices shape the world precisely because they leave no trace. They do not demand applause. They do not announce themselves. They simply make every decision that follows possible. So, what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The